All right,
There we
you
go.
should see at the top, this webinar is being recorded. Thank you so much for joining us. This is TEA, Texas Education for Homeless Children and Youth Program, McKinney-Vento 101 webinar. You're joining us today, Thursday, October 10th, and we will be doing this webinar from 11 to 1 p.m. We are so excited for you guys' questions. Your presenters for today is going to be myself, Dr. Desiree Veramontes. I'm the McKinney-Vento State Coordinator in the Highly Mobile and At-Risk Student Programs. And then go ahead, Dr. Lay.
And Dr. Ann Lay, I am the Highly Mobile and At-Risk Student Programs Specialist.
So just some housekeeping. Access for the resources, including this webinar, are going to be on our TEHCY web portal. Web page has got all different kinds of robust resources and things that you can use. Ann's going to go ahead and pop that into the chat so you guys have access to it. All right. So objectives and outline for what we're going to look at today. Very exciting. We're going to review the key requirements of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. We're going to take a deep dive into the roles and responsibilities for school districts that are also known as LEAs and open enrollment charter schools to support students experiencing homelessness. We'll start off with the McKinney-Vento definition. Ann's going to lead us through the data in our state currently. Then we're going to go into the McKinney-Vento requirement for all LEAs, McKinney-Vento implementation, identification, enrollment, and services. This is really the heart of any of your programs. And then we're going to do our TEHCY program updates and resources, of which we have many. We're very excited to share with you. And as we get through the next coming months, we'll have more and more to share with you guys. So if you haven't joined our listserv, pay careful attention at the end of the webinar for how to join the listserv so you know when we are releasing new resources and when we have updates to the web portal. So common terminology, and we use these interchangeably. McKinney-Vento is the federal McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. That you will hear that a student can be McKinney-Vento eligible or a student experiencing homelessness refers to the same thing. The Texas Education for Homeless Children and Youth Program, that is the Texas McKinney-Vento program at the national level. You just drop off the Texas and it's EHCY, so it's Education for Homeless Children and Youth at the national level. And then you have students experiencing homelessness refers to McKinney-Vento eligible students, as I referenced. And then local education agencies, also known as LEAs, is our Texas Public Schools and open enrollment charter schools. So just a couple of things to keep in mind on this terminology that we will use interchangeably throughout our presentation today. McKinney-Vento definitions and requirements. So the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act ensures students have immediate and equal access to public education. There's a few different ways that we do this in the McKinney-Vento Act, and so it's critical. It's very different from any of the other student populations that you may work with. So the rules kind of shift and change and sound a little bit different to school district personnel. So in explaining that and making sure that you know that it's couched in the federal law is really, really helpful. At the local level, it is incumbent upon LEAs to review and revise policies to remove barriers to school enrollment, as well as the retention of homeless children and youth. There's many ways that you can go about removing barriers. And all of our, from this McKinney-Vento 101 to any of the guidance that we put out, is constantly referring to how you can remove barriers to school enrollment and retention of homeless children and youth. So McKinney-Vento defines enrollment as attending classes and participating fully in school activities. Who is covered by the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act? So this language exists in PEMS, and we will get to that part of it a little bit later in the presentation. But essentially, it is children and youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, including children and youth. So in this first part, when you're looking at fixed, regular, and adequate, there is tons of guidance that delves into this one sentence of what does it look like to be fixed, regular, and adequate. And for students experiencing homelessness, there's a lot of transition between all these different living situations that I'm going to go through with you. So it's not uncommon for a family to begin by sharing the housing of other persons due to a loss of housing, economic hardship, or similar reason, and then shift into living into a motel, hotel, trailer park, camping grounds due to lack of alternative adequate accommodations. And then maybe jump back into sharing the housing with whoever they were sharing the housing with in the doubled up living situation. Living in emergency or transitional shelters. There's usually a time frame on transitional shelters or emergency shelters, or they're abandoned in hospitals. So when you're looking at that, there may be a time limit that's associated with some of the living situations, which is why children and youth who are covered under McKinney-Vento assistance can constantly lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence because they're going back and forth between the different living situations. They can also be living in a public or private place not designated for or ordinarily used as a regular sleeping accommodations for human beings. This could be somebody living in a garage. This could be somebody that's living in a public space, commonly referred to as unsheltered. So just a way to think about it and looking at the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. Continuing and looking at it, children and youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, including if they live in cars, parks, public spaces, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, bus or train stations, or similar settings. So when you're thinking about this with substandard or abandoned spaces, I constantly think about how it's been in Texas for the last 6 or 7 years. We've seen hurricanes, we've seen tornadoes, we've seen cold weather events. We've seen many things that have disrupted what would be adequate and stable housing and turned them into substandard housing. And then with the compounded effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, you could see substandard housing with mold. You could see a roof missing from a tornado ripping it off. I've seen these things, so like as being a McKinney-Vento liaison. So something that could have been fixed, regular, and adequate can quickly turn during a natural disaster into substandard housing or the after effects. I know with the winter events, there were many pipes that busted. So if that was you, if you lived through one of these natural disasters in your area, if you guys want to pop that into the chat of how it affected your own life, and then in thinking about how it affects our students and families. We also have migratory children living in the above circumstances that can qualify. It doesn't explicitly state this because this also could be a dual identification for foster care students, could also be in the above circumstances that we've discussed. And then our most vulnerable population within the homeless population would be unaccompanied youth, which includes a homeless child or youth not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian that meets these above circumstances. Throughout the last 10 years in working with the student population, it could be a 4-year-old that I was working with where they found the 4-year-old and the parent had passed away. It could be deportation of both parents and you're on your own. It could be a high school student who is leaving an unsafe living situation. And this is really critical when we go through the unaccompanied youth components, that you keep in mind that an unaccompanied youth is exactly what it sounds like. And it is through the federal designation only used within our school settings. So just a couple of things to keep in mind on who is covered under that. So if, Sarah, I see your question and we're on substandard and looking at this, if a student is living in an RV park, they could qualify under McKinney-Vento. And then Michelle's bringing up, it could be a trailer that has substandard living conditions. And so that could be the way that you can have an RV. Now, there's different ways that we can look at an RV. You can see stuff that is from like $200,000 to $300,000 of an RV that is like fully equipped. It's a choice that the family is making because they want to be highly mobile. I've seen that where they wouldn't qualify under McKinney-Vento. I think the critical component when you're looking at this is that they have no other place to go and there is some substandard, or they're not able to hook up to water or electricity or have any of those public facilities where there is, as Michelle mentioned, there's holes in the bottom of that. So it's critical for McKinney-Vento Liaison to go and look at particular, if they self-identify as living in a temporary living situation due to economic hardship or financial difficulties, living in an RV, they can qualify or they can't, like just depending, it's on a case-by-case basis as determined by the McKinney-Vento Liaison. Great questions. Keep them coming. Okay, Yadira, I see a really good question, and Anne's going to mark it for us about the refugee families. When we'll put it in the question and answer as we go through that, if we have time for that part of it, and I'll explain the sponsorship and potential qualification for McKinney-Vento with refugee families. So McKinney-Vento requirements for all school districts. Number one, first and foremost, every single school district across the state of Texas, so all 1,209, as well as everyone nationally, has to appoint a local McKinney-Vento homeless liaison and ensure they have the capacity to carry out the duties listed in the statute. So do you know who your local McKinney-Vento liaison is? How does your McKinney-Vento liaison inform LEA and campus staff of their McKinney-Vento liaison duties to support students experiencing homelessness? Do they provide annual McKinney-Vento training to LEA and campus staff? Have a process to disseminate McKinney-Vento program information and resources? List their contact information, program services, and referral processes on their McKinney-Vento website. So these are all requirements that you should be aware of and see for your school district across the state of Texas. And when we're looking at these requirements, it starts off with having a McKinney-Vento liaison, and then it jumps into their primary purpose, which is to identify students experiencing homelessness, as well as supporting those students experiencing homelessness. Enrolling students experiencing homelessness immediately within the McKinney-Vento law, immediate enrollment is the most important component of that, even without required records. Make student records available in a timely manner, provide services to students experiencing homelessness that are comparable to those offered to other students. So when you have students that are gifted and talented, that have a disability, that are in CTE, they could be in a variety, career and technical education, they could be in a variety of different programs, and transportation services, we'll get into school boards and transportation and what that looks like. But we're making sure that McKinney-Vento students have comparable access to services based off of their individual and unique needs. So this is on a case-by-case basis to make sure the McKinney-Vento liaison makes sure with school staff that they are getting all of those comparable services that are offered to other students. When we're looking at these requirements and what the liaison looks like in doing their duties, there's also the component of reviewing and revising policies that may act as barriers to the enrollment of students experiencing homelessness. There may be a local law or a local policy or a system or process that's in place at a school district that does not really help you fulfill the McKinney-Vento law. And so looking at these different policies, does your LEA review and revise LEA and campus policies to remove these barriers to ensure immediate enrollment and McKinney-Vento identification? When and how often does this process occur? Is this something that you put on the calendar every year? That was something that I would do to set a reminder to make sure that I was reviewing and revising policies, as well as things that came up that may have acted as a barrier for the students that I was serving. And then how are the new or revised policies communicated to LEA and campus staff? There's got to be a dissemination method with your professional development, with your correspondence or your phone calls, or the way that you connect in your systems and processes with your staff. Determine when your LEA most recently reviewed or revised any policies that impact McKinney-Vento program services. It can be a little tricky to do that at the beginning of the year. When I said the beginning of the year, I usually marked it for October. This is a great time to review and revise policies that may act as barriers. You have interacted with your student population that's been identified through that first sweep of the school identification for back to school. And then you are looking at everything ahead of snapshot. So it's a good time to start looking at those things and start seeing if there's ways that you can remove barriers for your students. School of origin. So McKinney-Vento requirements is to provide school of origin transportation if it is requested by a parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth, and it is in the best interest of the student to do so. And we will jump into transportation and school of origin a little bit deeper as we go through the presentation. When you're looking at the requirements for all LEAs, when it comes to dispute or complaint or local grievance process, under the McKinney-Vento law, every McKinney-Vento liaison has to provide a written notice to parents, guardians, and unaccompanied youth related to the appeal process if the LEA sends the student to a school other than the school requested. So we will do a whole dispute resolution and looking at local grievances, but this is at a high level, all of the requirements for school districts as we go through the presentation.
We've got a lot of questions.
I'm sure. Let's see.
We
Go ahead, Ian.
The first one that came into the Q&A, thank you so much for using the Q&A. Amy Anderson asked, is there a time frame for doubled up?
So that's going to be case by case. There's not really a time frame. There's a component during the presentation that we'll touch on duration of homelessness. That is going to be depending on the family and the student. So when you're looking at the student living in a doubled up situation, is it continued economic hardship and financial difficulties? Can they afford their own housing? Is there a medical crisis maybe that they're navigating, or some kind of event that happened that wiped them out financially? There's different circumstances that can go on. I had a student that I was serving from when they were in foster care. Well, they were in the homeless program first, and then they were in foster care, and then they were back in my homeless program. And that duration of homelessness, it was in and out. But overall, the student was 10 years. I've had families be in the program due to a medical crisis, so they were unable to work or continue to work. And so they lived doubled up because they had no other way to do that, and didn't qualify for housing. Some of the HUD, when you're looking at it, housing and urban development, those timelines can be, 8 to 10 years. In some of the counties, they can be 2 years. They can be a lottery system. So the definition for doubled up is that first portion of the things that we did when it's sharing the housing of others due to economic hardship or financial difficulties. So you'll have access to the slide deck, and it's in that first portion of what doubled up is. It's sharing the housing due to economic hardship and financial difficulties, Tracy.
And I'm going to drop in the link in the chat, the Tweeds Teams coding definition, so you guys can see the homeless status definitions for those. And it's dropping. Yep. There you go.
And we also will go through that a little bit later in the presentation. Stephanie, would a student who is not involved with CPS but residing with a non-custodial parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle considered unaccompanied youth? It depends. If they are in that situation due to economic hardship, financial difficulties, safety, there is a flow chart for unaccompanied youth that was put out as a national resource from the National Technical Assistance Center from the Department of Education.
I got it.
You got it? Okay. That she'll drop into the chat for you guys. And that flow chart is really helpful because you can see, you can follow it and see who is not, who is for an unaccompanied youth. Sandy, you're welcome. We will go through very extensively the 30-day time frame, Margarita, so we'll hold on to your question until we get to that section for vaccinations. Love all the questions. Thank you guys for bringing that up. We are going to go ahead and jump into McKinney-Vento statewide data, and Dr. Lee is going to lead us in this.
All right, so it's important to review student data just to see what the demographics will look like and how your students are doing academically in order to help inform on the McKinney-Vento program implementation. So let's take a look at the statewide data. So this slide here, you can see a look at the statewide data for homeless student identification. This data particularly is pulled from the latest end of year PEIMS data that's available, which is the 22 to 23 school year. We are still working on the 23 to 24 school year end of year report. So as of right now, the most publicly available is going to be 22-23. So this table shows the trend in identification numbers for the last 5 school years. And so this is also reported on our TEHCY infographics, which we will cover a little bit later. But as a note, TEA has attributed lower identification, if you can see, in the 20 to 21 school year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But by 22-23, Texas identification has increased 23%, which mirrors pre-pandemic counts. So the next slide, Desiree, can you move it to the next slide? Yep, there you go. So this number here is based on the enrollment in Texas Public Schools 23 to 24 report, which is publicly available. I will drop the link in a bit. But here you're taking a look at the percentage of homeless students as a part of the total Texas student population of enrollment. So we are seeing an increase in identification over the last couple of years. So now we're at 1.4% of the total enrollment of Texas students in public schools. The next slide here, we usually look at the living situation based on doubled up, shelter, hotel, motel, or unsheltered. And as you can see here, there's a 3-year trend. Again, 21 to 22 data was not available due to COVID reporting, but if we're looking at doubled up, you can see the red, which is the most latest data that we have. It is very similar to the pre-pandemic, and it's at 77% of all homeless students, which are living in doubled up. It is actually doubled up is the most common situation, but it's also the most difficult to identify. With shelter, you can see that it's remained relatively stable at 9%. Hotel motel has increased a little bit each of the school year, and then unsheltered actually decreased over the 3 years that are being reported. On the next slide, we are looking at students identified as homeless and other special populations. So they're duly identified in another population program. So here we have our special education, we have our emergent bilinguals, which previously was called English learners, and then we're also seeing migrant. So the percentage you see are rounded up to the nearest whole number. If you'll take notice, students identified in both homeless and special education has increased since the 19 to 20 school year. And the percentage stayed the same, relatively stable across the years for English learners or emergent bilinguals, but there was an increase by 4% this past year. And then migrant has remained the same at 1% rounded up. On the next slide, in terms of graduation, you will see 2 data points across 4 different school years. These are class of, so class of 2020, class of 2021, 22, and then class of 23. So these graduation classes. The blue signifies all students who's graduated in the 4-year plan for graduation. And then the orange is our homeless students. Graduation for all students has remained stable at 90%. Since 2020, our graduation rates for our homeless students has decreased, but this past class of 2023, we saw a 1% increase for graduation. So the interventions, the services and supports that you guys are providing is increasing the graduation rates for our homeless students. And then the next slide, we have our unaccompanied homeless student enrollment in Texas public schools. So of the identified homeless student count in 2023, there was a 14.3% that were identified as unaccompanied youth, which the number is signified by the 387. And if you've noticed between the 20 to 21, 21 to 22, and 22 to 23, the number of accompanied homeless student enrollment has increased by thousands each of those school years. And unaccompanied youth includes a homeless child or youth that is not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. And the last slide here is going to be the most updated infographics we have for this school year, which is the 2024 to 25 school year. But remember, we're using the most available public data we have, which is 22 to 23. So the data is lagging behind, but we've updated our webpage. And so this infographic can be downloaded and shared with your schools, your school districts, with anybody who would like to see the numbers for our homeless status. And the information here is also the information that we just shared. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop some of those links into the chat now. Do we have any questions regarding the statewide data?
Do not see anything.
Okay.
For state, okay, we have one. From Rose Valadares, when current data in for homeless, will new immigrants be a category? We will have the same categories that are always included. And Rose, we need a little bit more context on what you're classifying as new immigrants to be a category. That would be a great follow-up question for our homeless education inbox. Tiffany pointed out that the flow chart link is not working. So if you want to check it and then go ahead and put that back in there.
Okay. Let me see.
All right, McKinney-Vento liaison duties. What are all the things that a McKinney-Vento liaison does under the McKinney-Vento federal law? So they facilitate identification of students experiencing homelessness by providing identification procedures, training of all school district staff, awareness materials, as well as collaborating with the community at a very high level. So these are all of the big pillars or buckets, if you will, in looking at the McKinney-Vento liaison identification for students experiencing homelessness. So McKinney-Vento liaison duties. Liaisons must ensure that students experiencing homelessness, number one, are identified collaboratively with school personnel, other organizations, and agencies. So this could be with motel hotel staff. This could be with shelters. This could be with organizations where the families have gone in for assistance. It's not uncommon to have strong community collaborations, depending on what your school district context is, for the McKinney-Vento liaison to do that, as well as with school district personnel. Registrars are one of the key personnel at each campus that help with that first part of the student residency questionnaire that we're going to jump into. And so just making sure that you know that you have school district connections that you make, as well as community connections that you make as a McKinney-Vento liaison. They also make sure that students are enrolled and provided equitable access to succeed in school. This can be getting some wraparound supports to meet Maslow's hierarchy of needs for the student. This could also be getting tutoring support if they've gone to a variety of different campuses as they go in and out. This can also look like having access to educational services for which they are available. They could need to be identified for gifted and talented, or need to be evaluated for a disability. So just looking and making sure that they have access to all the educational services that they're eligible. And when they do have multiple identifications or dual identification, that gives you like a robust amount of services that you can work with other personnel to coordinate those services and help the students out. McKinney-Vento liaison also really works with the community to receive referrals for medical, dental, mental health, housing services, and other appropriate services, includes families. And so really connecting your students and families as a warm handoff with these community collaborations, depending on what is available in your area or pretty close to your area. I love this part. So McKinney-Vento liaisons, you ensure that there's a poster on every campus. The posters really assist in being in a space when you walk into the school or walk into the registrar's office where a student or a family can look at that poster and be like, oh, that is something that I'm in that living situation. And so they're able to self-identify and be provided services. So McKinney-Vento posters are posted by students, parents, guardians, and unaccompanied youth. There's many school districts and campuses that have this right for however they come in to do the registration process. Seen it in registrar's offices. I've seen it on like, if you have, when you walk into the campus, there's a nice billboard, or not billboard, but you have a nice board where you have like all of the important information for that campus, seen posters there. So it really just depends on like the ethos of your campus and where students and parents are frequenting and going by. I've also seen the posters in the parent lounge. So just wherever it's appropriate, McKinney-Vento liaisons work with those campuses to make sure that they're there. For disputes, student eligibility for McKinney-Vento, school selection, or student enrollment are the three disputes that are mediated in accordance with the requirements of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. So those top three are the ones that we could go through the local grievance process, and that goes through the entire school board. We'll go through that process a little bit later in the dispute section, but you could only do a complaint that we would hear here at TEA if it is for school selection, student enrollment, and student eligibility under the McKinney-Vento Act. McKinney-Vento liaisons also, and this could be a huge chunk of it, there was many days where transportation took a lot of my day, but looking at supporting parents and guardians and unaccompanied youth, that they're informed of all transportation services available, including school of origin transportation. School of origin transportation is not an immediate thing that can happen for students and families. And so just recognizing that when a family lives outside of the attendance area for that school district and you're working with the other school district to coordinate that transportation, it could be a 3 to 5 day timeline, or it could be a little bit longer. If some of my liaisons want to pop in the chat what their timeline is for transportation, that would be super helpful. So you guys can kind of see that across the state of how long it takes to get those services routed. Typically for an attendance area, a student or family will enroll in the morning and they're on a bus in the afternoon. That is not the case with school of origin transportation. So just having that awareness around school of origin transportation can be very helpful, and communicating that with your parents and families, as well as campus personnel. McKinney-Vento liaison duties continued. So school district personnel receive their professional development about McKinney-Vento from their liaison. This could be in modules that are at the beginning of the year that everybody goes through. This could be virtual recordings, or like as new staff members start throughout the year, you do that kind of thing. This could be a one-on-one that you do in person at the campus, or you do virtually. This could be having a whole like guide sheet of like, okay, this, depending on how they interact with it, what survey responses that they may send you about, like, these are different things that we would like to hear about from McKinney-Vento, as well as just doing the your own version as a McKinney-Vento liaison of 101 and basic facts that everybody needs to know. Liaisons also ensure that parents or guardians of students experiencing homelessness are informed of all the educational opportunities available to their students, and provide those opportunities to participate in their students' education. So as a liaison, this could be walking the families through Home Access Center, if that's what your district uses. So some kind of parent portal that shows them the grades that could look different across different school districts, making sure that they're kept up to date with that. I've also seen where McKinney-Vento liaisons will send report cards, or looking at attendance, or looking at different things with that for their students that are experiencing homelessness with the families. There could be reminds for different things that are going on that go out as text messages. There's many ways to interact with parents and guardians to make sure that they feel included and a part of the whole system. Also, if you know that you have like a college fair coming up, like just doing like, or there's a community event where families are able to access, like Coats for Kids comes out as we get a little bit colder. I know it's Texas, we're not exactly there yet, but it is getting a little bit cooler, but just different opportunities for your families and making sure that they know those opportunities are available. Anything to make their lives a little bit easier as they navigate the school system. So McKinney-Vento liaisons as it pertains to unaccompanied homeless youth, making sure that the student is, well, unaccompanied youth is a very distinct thing when you're looking at it, and it really starts with the enrollment process. So just depending on who your McKinney-Vento liaison is and what this looks like, in the district that I came from, being a liaison, it was not uncommon if there was an unaccompanied youth for me to go over to the campus and meet with the unaccompanied youth, make sure that they were enrolled in school, made sure they had all the assistance that they needed, looking at what school they were coming from. So meeting with the student, meeting with the counselor, looking at what academic things were being provided, what school they were coming from. So it can be all the way through building the schedule and taking a look at that, to also doing a check-in, like what does the student need? They may have moved very quickly from where they were, so they may need access to clothing or hygiene products, or they may need tutoring supports that are already in place inside of that school. So just making sure that that unaccompanied youth has those same opportunities and then just knows how the school system works. It can be very valuable for the unaccompanied youth just to have like a quick walkthrough of like, this is how these are the restrooms that we have. This is where you can get your nutrition services. There was many times in me checking in with my unaccompanied youth where the students reported that they hadn't eaten lunch for 2 weeks because they didn't know how to do it. Or that there was different accidents that occurred because the unaccompanied youth didn't know where the bathroom was. And so it is very pivotal and important to make sure that they get a walkthrough of the school, that they know which campus personnel that they can go and speak with if they have any questions. And then as they become a senior, that they're informed of their independent status for the purpose of the free application for federal student aid. That's the FAFSA. So under McKinney-Vento, they're known as unaccompanied homeless youth. Under the FAFSA, they're known as an independent student. It's very pivotal to have the McKinney-Vento liaison walk the unaccompanied youth through that portion of it. And this is for seniors that are identified as both homeless and an unaccompanied youth. And we'll hit on that FAFSA portion just a little bit later so you guys can get a deeper look at that part.
All right, so there is a question in the chat. Does each LEA have to be posted in AskTED every year? So this is a reminder. All LEAs must designate a McKinney-Vento liaison to carry out the duties listed in the Federal McKinney-Vento Act. Now, I'm going to drop the link of a resource that has been updated for you, but LEAs must ensure that their designated liaison's contact information is in AskTED and that it is up to date throughout the school year. Previous guidance said that it needs to be updated annually. However, if you know that staffing changes have occurred, different people go into the position, each time the liaison position has changed or updated, that needs to be updated in AskTED. The reason why this is important is because our web portal links AskTED information directory into our web portal, and parents and community members and ESCs, they are accessing that information to be able to reach out whenever there are questions or concerns that they need to contact the local liaison to assist with. And if that's not up to date, then sometimes parents are waiting for a response because they emailed somebody that was on AskTED but was no longer in the school district. And so very important to keep that up to date. Districts will submit their liaison information to TEA through the district's AskTED administrator. Each district will have an administrator that will maintain the AskTED information. If you're a charter school, you submit your liaison information to TEA's charter school division directly, and the email is charterschools@tea.texas.gov. So on the next slide is the link that I just dropped. It is a guidance how-to document on how to search for your liaison. Desiree, can you go to the next slide, please? If you can search the liaison by the district, by campus, by the state, by the region, and there's a QR code that you can click with your camera right now. but it is an up-to-date, it released in September, and it's also posted on our webpage. It walks you through how to search and locate. So we are updating our AskTED directory on our web portal every month now. And so if there are changes, we'll be pulling that information and updating our web portal. So please, if you have any questions, please send an email to our homeless inbox, and then we'll be happy to address that.
Pause to process with some questions. So we've been answering some of them in the question. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A portion of it. And all those Q&A questions we will definitely answer and get to.
There is a question, and Dr. Viramontes did respond to it. So there was a liaison that's posted for a district as a foster liaison. So foster liaison and McKinney-Vento liaison are two separate positions. They have to both be designated.
So we wouldn't be able to show you where to go to check AskTED if it's up to date. You would have to connect with who your school district AskTED coordinator is. So you can ask your supervisor or ask around at your school district. Every single school district has an AskTED administrator that updates that information. So you would need, Jacqueline, you would need to check with them.
And yes, Angie, McKinney-Vento liaison is designated in AskTED as homeless liaison. Thank you for pointing that out. If you want to, if you're curious, you are able to go into AskTED and search your school, and then whoever is assigned there is going to pop up. If that's not the correct person, then you need to contact your district's AskTED administrator to get that updated. But you can see who's currently listed as your liaison.
Great. And then we have Bertha, you're asking that you're new to McKinney-Vento. That's great. We're so glad you're in the right webinar for McKinney-Vento 101. Is it mandatory that we provide clothing? There is no mandatory when you're looking at McKinney-Vento for clothing. That's not a mandatory aspect. You do what is mandatory is to connect students and families to community wraparound supports. One of those would be clothing. And so school districts do not always necessarily provide clothing. When I was a McKinney-Vento liaison, I did use national, state, and local resources to help students with clothing. I also used ARP funding to do clothing. There's an expansion use of funds inside of our TEHCY grants that allow for that. So it just depends on what your needs are for your school district and what you're able to provide for them. You can also connect with your ESC McKinney-Vento contact, and we'll have everybody's ESC McKinney-Vento contact at the end of the presentation so that you can make sure that if there is any connections to clothing, that you can do that through the community if you're not able to provide that through your school district, as you indicated. Great questions. And then we are going to jump into some of the transportation ones. So Sandra, we'll get to that question a little bit later. So McKinney-Vento identification, enrollment, and services. McKinney-Vento student identification. So school districts should have processes and strategies in place to identify students experiencing homelessness upon enrollment anytime during the school year in the event of a natural disaster. So when you're looking at this, your processes and strategies should look like student comes in, they're provided immediate enrollment. The second step is for them to have determination of McKinney-Vento eligibility that comes from the liaison. And then the third step is to do an assessment of services. So we'll do a full walkthrough with the forms that typically are used in every school district and mandated under the McKinney-Vento Act. So you can kind of see that, but these are the three steps. One, you enroll them immediately. Then you do your determination of McKinney-Vento eligibility. And then the third step is to do an assessment of services that the student may need. Immediate enrollment. So immediate enrollment does not have a direct timeline, but students experiencing homelessness cannot be identified for McKinney-Vento program services if they're not enrolled in school, which is why immediate enrollment is that first step. A parent or other person with legal control of a student under a court order who is enrolling the student has up to 30 days from the date of enrollment to provide proof of the student's identity. Any of the documents in the following list is acceptable for proof of identity and age. So this could be a birth certificate, statement of the child's date of birth issued for school admission purposes by Texas Vital Statistics, a division of the Texas Department of State and Health Services. This could be a driver's license, passport, school ID card, records, or report card, military ID, hospital birth record, adoption record, church baptismal record, any other legal document that establishes identity. This is outlined in TEA's Student Attendance Accounting Handbook 3.33, documentation of identity and age, and we will be including the link to this resource on our document. So you can do provisional enrollment without immunizations and birth certificates. And I know that was one of the questions that was in the Q&A. And so we'll walk through that portion of it. And you can do immediate enrollment, even if they've missed an application or enrollment deadlines under the federal law during any period of homelessness. So if they are identified as being in a homeless situation, missed application or enrollment deadlines do not apply for somebody who is in any period of homelessness. Provisional enrollment for all students. So a parent or legal guardian who is enrolling the student has up to 30 days from the date of enrollment to provide proof of the student's identity, which we went through, and you can see that acceptable documentation to provide for proof of identity and age include the birth certificate, passport, driver's license, school ID or report card, military ID, church baptismal records. This can also come through and does come through very often through the TREC system. So if you're doing a provisional enrollment with incomplete school records, when a student moves from one Texas public school district or charter school to another, student records must be transferred using the TREC system within 10 working days of receiving the request. So TREX is the Texas Records Exchange. Your registrars at every campus has access to TREX, and this can provide some of the records that we just went through for that provisional enrollment if they have no documentation when they're doing the enrollment. So it'll have the Texas Unique ID, their date of birth, current grade level, social security number, and immunization information. So if they have no records or no identification, but they're coming from another Texas public school, TREX is the system, and working with your registrar to get that information can be very, very helpful. Provisional enrollment with incomplete immunizations. This is a very popular question to come up in technical assistance. So we'll go through this portion of it. Students experiencing homelessness shall be admitted provisionally for 30 business days if acceptable evidence of immunizations is not available. So the school must provisionally enroll the student immediately. If a student needs to obtain immunizations, the enrolling school must refer the parent or guardian to the county health authority, community health providers, or other community resources available that can assist the family to obtain the required immunizations. So that is also part of the law. Not only do you have to do the provisional enrollment, but you also have to help the family obtain the required immunizations that you're asking for, especially if they're new into your school district or area. When you're doing this provisional enrollment, families do like to be up to date and do what they need to do. It can be very helpful working with your school nurses who usually have this information as a McKinney-Vento liaison, and making sure that both the nurse at that campus that the enrollment is being requested, as well as the parent, know when, where to go to get the immunizations, and then have a date. When as a McKinney-Vento liaison, I'm working with families to do these referrals to those community services, I would always do a direct communication between myself, the nurse, the administrator, as well as the family, of what date they had to go get their immunizations. During COVID, this could take a little bit longer, but just so that everybody from the family to the campus was aware of the date when the immunizations were going to be obtained and when to look for that part of it. This portion of it for provisional enrollment and immunizations comes directly from the Texas Department of State Health Services Immunization Unit. So you can scan the QR code, this portion of it, and there's also going to be a link when we have this uploaded on our web portal. When you're looking at this, this is students without an immunization record. a student is homeless or in foster care. And this is exactly where that portion of the law lives, where students are experiencing homelessness shall be admitted provisionally for 30 business days if acceptable evidence of immunizations is not available. If a student needs to obtain immunizations, again, the enrolling school must refer the parent or guardian to the county health authority, community health providers, or other community resources available that can assist the family in obtaining the required immunizations. Another state provision, when you're looking at this, so you have a parent that wants to enroll their child in another school district. So they could be, as a homeless family, they can select any school district in the state of Texas under Texas Education Code 25001B5. So when you're looking at that, you have a family that gets connected to you as a McKinney-Vento liaison, and they want to enroll in your school district, and they are experiencing homelessness. The answer is yes. The parent could be escaping domestic violence. The parent could be needing to, like, they work in that area and they want to go to that school district. And so the answer is yes, that they can enroll in the school district. The stress that the McKinney-Vento liaison will work with the family to determine the campus that best meets the needs of the student and family. And so the stress, like the McKinney-Vento liaison needs to stress to that family that you are able to select the school district, but you do not get to select the campus. So they can enroll in any school district across the state, and then the McKinney-Vento liaison will assist the family and the administrators, it's a balancing act, in selecting the campus that best meets the needs of the students experiencing homelessness. In this case, it works very similar to the transfer process in school districts where McKinney-Vento transportation does not apply. So this is a unique Texas law in the Texas Education Code, where students that are experiencing homelessness are eligible to enroll in any school district across the state of Texas. We'll do a pause to process there. I know I've brought up many things. So we have John Estrada is asking a question: what happens if the family does not submit records within 30 days? So I'm just going to answer that live. So very typically, a huge majority of our students are going to come from other Texas schools. And so you're able to get those records from the TREX request. I would say in the school district that I was working with students experiencing homelessness, it was done within like 70% of my families every year. I would be able to fulfill those requests through the TREX request. There are other instances where you have a family or a student experiencing homelessness that has like no access to their records. They were wiped out in like an apartment fire or a flood or a tornado or whatever it happened to be. And in those cases, the McKinney-Vento liaison connects with vital records offices to help the family obtain those records and do that, and communicating with the campus administration and the registrar that is going on. Those processes can take much longer, and accessing those records. They can also be coming from another state. And so the McKinney-Vento liaison can work with the registrar to registrar. I remember working with a school district in North Carolina and California and Florida. They have similar records requests across the nation. And so we were always able to get the records that we needed to fulfill that request, much like our Texas Records Exchange request worked. So there are many ways to go about getting that. It just depends in the case-by-case situation on what that looks like. Internationally, the same thing, that can be requested and done. And remember, when you're providing that provisional enrollment and you're doing that, the important thing is that you're removing barriers to make sure that that student is able to be enrolled in school. So that retention portion of being enrolled in school is the important component of it. And the McKinney-Vento liaison is the one working with the students and families, depending on what vital records or what their unique circumstances are. So Albert Archuleta, our ESC McKinney-Vento liaison, is asking, what about the adult who is enrolling the students and they are missing custody paperwork? Can we still enroll the students? The answer is yes. You can get a student, you're providing immediate enrollment. Remember, as a school district, the function is to make sure that students are enrolled in school as quickly as possible. So if they are missing any of that paperwork, that what we're providing for them is to make sure that that student is enrolled. If they don't have any custody paperwork, they can be enrolled provisionally as an unaccompanied youth. Beatrice, you're asking within federal law, there is no 30-day time frame. Does withdrawal occur after 30 days? Are you referring to the 30-day provisional enrollment for immunizations? Because that would be within the Texas Education Code for the immunization part of it. So depending on your school district and your campus, if it's talking about immunizations, like I said, like I would communicate that the family has an appointment if it took a little bit longer after the 30 days for them to be able to get an appointment during COVID, or just low income, or working with the state Health and Human Services, it can be a little bit longer to get that appointment. And so typically in working with those campuses, they were understanding of that as long as there was an appointment that was in place for those immunization records. There are some campuses that they give the 30 days, they provided where to go get that. The parent has said that they're going to go to the appointment, something happens and they don't. As a school district, you can withdraw them, but under the McKinney-Vento federal law, they will be eligible to re-enroll. So they'll be able to re-enroll and be provided immediate enrollment. So it works a little bit easier when you are working with the student and the family to make sure what barriers can be removed for them to access getting their immunizations. There are some school districts that have immunizations and medical services that happen within the school district at their central administration building. There's others that work with the county to make sure that they have access to Health and Human Services and working with those appointments to get those in place. There's different transportation that can be provided, like a bus pass to help the parent do that. In the Austin area, students that are under 18, they can use their school ID to travel for free. So there's unaccompanied youth that used our transportation system, the buses, to get to where they needed to go. So it just really depends on the local context and what you're looking at. As long as you're doing a good faith effort and removing those barriers and helping the student stay in school, the goal is for them to stay enrolled.
Desiree, there's a question about reaching out for the 30-day business before withdrawing a student. So this school district has reached out to health and safety departments, but also their ESC McKinney-Vento liaisons. They're wondering if there's an organization that they can contact to help with compliance.
Typically, it's Texas Health and Human Services. And so if you have contacted your county, Texas Health and Human Services, I would get the state contact on there and contact them again, and then just do like in that email, we reached out on like the timeline of dates that you reached out and when you reached out and what you were looking for. Depending on your area, there's also low income ways to get immunizations. Even working with like local doctors, I've seen like mobile vans when they come and do immunizations or eyeglasses or whatever have you. And we had those come out in a few of the school districts that I worked in to make sure that students were able to access that and become eligible. I will say when you're connecting to community supports and you're doing that community collaboration as a McKinney-Vento liaison, you do get very creative. So like you got to make sure that you're using every avenue and resource. And I would definitely direct you to your ESC McKinney-Vento liaison and helping you troubleshoot that. They have that regional perspective and they may see different access to different things for those regionally that you may not be aware of. Determining eligibility. Thank you guys so much. We are almost exactly halfway through our webinar and looking at McKinney-Vento 101. We are in this portion really digging into the intake process, the student residency questionnaire. And so when you're determining eligibility, both of these components really go hand in hand. So we have a sample SRQ and intake form that is on our TEHCY web portal. And looking at this, when you're updating these forms, so the student residency questionnaire is part of that first day packet when you're working with your students and your families. If you guys are looking at this, if you want to pop into the chat, like if you remember bringing a welcome packet home or an enrollment packet home to your parents and they had to sign all of that paperwork, we do have to require, or we do have to have the student residency questionnaire a part of that enrollment paperwork. Home language survey is another thing that's included in that enrollment paperwork. And so it's something that's been filled out since the late 1980s. It's a recommended best practice to assist with the identification of students experiencing homelessness. This is a tool to assist with identification for families to discreetly identify themselves. And so when you're looking at that first question, is your current address a temporary living arrangement? It's always best on a student residency questionnaire to keep it discreet and to have it very open-ended and broad to answer that. This is why we have this student residency questionnaire as an exemplar. And then, is the temporary living arrangement due to a loss of housing, economic hardship, or financial difficulties? And you can go through that student residency questionnaire. They're intended to be one pager, very quick, and families are able to self-identify the living situation that they're in. So the intake form that you're using is to clarify responses on the student residency questionnaire to determine identification and program services. So this is where you get into the meat of the questions when you are doing that. To clarify those responses when you're doing that, it could be a phone call that or in the conversation that you're following up on the student residency questionnaire that you completed with your child or your children. The purpose of the call or the conversation is to ask a few questions that will assist in determining if your student qualifies for services under the McKinney-Vento Assistance Act. And then you walk through each of those portions of it. Also, the intake form is a great tool to ensure that all eligible students in a family are identified. So if there's multiple students, down towards the bottom of our sample form, do you have other children? You can put a list of all the children and the other campuses that they're associated with and then collect their student residency questionnaires from their enrollment. So you have the entire family enrolled and identified on the same day. On the back of the intake form is where you do that community services provided at intake, as well as the federally mandated services, their nutrition services. Do they need assistance with Title I programs? Do they need transportation to the school of origin? Do they need parent education? Just depending on what your school district offers, it could have, when you're modifying the form, what is available in your community, what is available through your school district, what you're able to assist students and families in getting connected to. So your sample student residency questionnaire, these are 3 components of it. It's a best practice to determine McKinney-Vento eligibility. It's available in a digital and paper format. This is very important when you're doing the enrollment process or you're going throughout the school year. If you have a tornado hit or an apartment fire, something that just happens throughout the school year, you could have families that are affected by that, and having a paper format for this form could be outside of your digital enrollment process. So ideally, your student residency questionnaire form is offered throughout the school year in case any of those things happen where a student that was in a fixed, adequate, and regular nighttime setting is now in crisis due to a variety of situations. So having it digitally and in a paper format can be very instrumental in assisting your students. SRQs are completed throughout the school year, so it's not just at the time that the student is enrolling. Again, it can be due to an event that happens or a family medical crisis. So just keep that in mind, and we'll go through a few of those instances. So SRQ and intake process assessing McKinney-Vento eligibility. Once the family or unaccompanied youth has completed the SRQ, the McKinney-Vento liaison will proceed with determining eligibility by assessing the following. So you're really mapping out a timeline and living situation to determine McKinney-Vento eligibility. Not all families living in a hotel would be considered homeless. So when you're looking at that, you could have a family that has moved into a motel or hotel because they're doing a renovation project or they are getting a home built. But you can also have many families that are living in a motel or hotel because there is nowhere else for them to go. They've lost a job, they've lost their housing due to unforeseen circumstances. And so when you're looking at that, there's many reasons that a family could be in a temporary living situation due to a loss of housing and economic hardship. And it's those families that would be McKinney-Vento eligible. When you're looking at families living in a doubled up living situations, they could be considered homeless if they have economic hardship or financial difficulties. And in asking those questions, just remember to remain sensitive when you're working with families. A good way to understand this is if you were asking the questions to a good friend of yours and they're like, wow, that's deeply personal. It is deeply personal to talk about your living situation, your economic hardship or financial difficulties. So that's just something to be cognizant of. And also, not all families living doubled up would be considered homeless. So they would be considered homeless if they have economic hardship or financial difficulties. It could also be a choice. They could be living with a family member that they're assisting through some kind of medical crisis. It could be that they are living there while something else is happening, but they don't have economic hardship. So just making sure that you're looking at it in a case-by-case situation and really asking the questions like, what is the families or unaccompanied youth's current living situation? Is it temporary due to a recent loss of housing? Is it fixed, regular, and adequate? Is the family or unaccompanied youth living in a hotel, a shelter, unsheltered, or doubled up living situation? And the community supports and how you respond to those students and families could change depending on what living situation they need and how much crisis and trauma they're going through for what you're connecting them with. The sample intake form with the McKinney-Vento liaison with the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth is really clarifying the responses of on the SRQ. They're documenting their school of origin, and they're identifying all eligible students in the family. When you're looking at it and you're doing that at the point of intake, you're reviewing all program services that are available in your school district and your community. You're documenting referrals and services that are being provided, and you're documenting non-qualification criteria and intake notes. Your non-qualification criteria and intake notes is what you would use to do that formal communication to the parent or family if they do not qualify to be McKinney-Vento. And so that is what you would do for that first part of the dispute resolution process, but you're really doing this at the point of intake for every family that is eligible, or if they are not eligible, you're making sure that you're doing a written notice for that. If they are eligible, typically a McKinney-Vento liaison will do a welcome email connecting them to the resources that would happen in the conversation, and then community available things that they're looking through and helping them navigate whatever resource there, if it's a website, if it's a packet of information, if it's campus personnel that are going to help direct them to that. If it's health and human services, what different things do they provide? Is there a phone number or a person that you can do a warm handoff to? So those kind of things would typically go in the welcome email. As a liaison, we had a form email that we would use, and I would always highlight different portions depending on the conversation with the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth that would be particularly helpful to that family as they're looking through it, and also how to use the website as well as the community packet that we would hand out and constantly be updating. So if you're doing a non-qualification, you're still doing an email to the family to let them know what criteria was not met under McKinney-Vento for them to not be identified and approved for the McKinney-Vento program. And that does need to be written documentation. We would do that through an email and then also do a letter that got sent out. Events that may lead to a loss of housing. This could be unemployment. This could be divorce. This could be domestic abuse. This could be medical issues, lack of affordable housing, or a natural disaster. I don't think that anywhere in Texas, there's not this issue of lack of affordable housing. So if you've personally encountered lack of affordable housing in your area, if you want to go ahead and pop that into the chat. I know when I was a housing and urban development board member for a local county over here, the affordable housing crisis was just huge in this area. And looking at helping families connect. There was many times where an apartment complex would be reasonable. I remember one time that the rent went from $800 to $1,500 in the span of 3 months. And so the entire apartment complex of families that was living there was displaced. And some were able to connect to affordable housing and others were not. So any of these things can affect a family at any point in time. Unemployment, divorce, lack of affordable housing, a natural disaster, or a medical issue can pop up for a family throughout the school year. So in looking at this, many families experiencing homelessness because of a major life event, which could lead to a situation where they have economic hardship and financial difficulties. So there was many times as a McKinney-Vento liaison that you are calling a family that's in a temporary living situation and they've had one of these major life events, and just knowing that your phone call and your questions could be very helpful to them and instrumental in them helping to stabilize, and taking care of the student's education can be really, really helpful. But when you're going through a major life event, it can also be extremely difficult. And I will say that not all of my families were in the best headspace. They were a little bit in shock or a little bit angry or a little bit frustrated as they were going through that. And so recognizing that any of us, as we go through major life events, you could be calling somebody on one of the hardest days of their lives. I remember calling a family whose house burnt down, all the way down. And that was completely devastating for every reason for the students and the families. And so any of these major life events can be very hard for our families and our students. For an unaccompanied homeless youth, when you're looking at this, you really, as a McKinney-Vento liaison, you review each situation on a case-by-case basis, always referring back to this on a case-by-case basis. You're going to review their living situation and their nighttime residency, and you have to know that the student must be both. They have to be both unaccompanied and experiencing homelessness. If a student is unaccompanied, but there's no economic hardship or financial difficulties, that could be a family choice for them to be on their own, then they would not qualify under McKinney-Vento. If a family, you have a senior who needs to finish school and they left them with an aunt or a close family friend so that they're able to finish it, they could be unaccompanied, not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian, but it wouldn't qualify them as an unaccompanied homeless youth. That's a very unique designation. In working with students that were unaccompanied youth, there could be where the student was a US citizen, but both parents were from another country and they were both deported. So I helped students and families with that. There was a unique situation where we had a student that came in that was living in a garage and they were on the foreign exchange program. And then once they turned 18, their host family kicked them out. It was during COVID, and then they started living in a garage. And so they became unaccompanied and homeless in our country, connected them to community college, and they are thriving, which is awesome. I always love hearing from the students that are excelling and doing really great things. But just keep in mind when you're doing identification of unaccompanied homeless youth that they have to be both unaccompanied and experiencing homelessness. I'm going to pause to process here and see if you guys have any questions. All right, so Valerie, I'm going to go ahead and answer your question live. If there is an authorized agreement signed by the parent and a student is living with the family member, are they still considered to be covered? That would depend. I would say that if you, like, let's say you have a notarized letter that Samantha is going to start living with the family member because the student is in a homeless, or the family is in a homeless living situation, like the mom is going to go to a shelter, but she doesn't want her student to go with her. That student in that case, in that instance, would be qualifiable as an unaccompanied homeless youth. You can have other circumstances. Well, let me stay on that one. So you have Samantha, mom is in a homeless shelter. They've been identified as an unaccompanied homeless youth. No notarized letter is going to take away guardianship. So guardianship is only done through the court system. So it would have to be done through the court system for that guardianship to change. So if you have a notarized letter or you have an email or a text, I've seen all different kinds of things for that student, and it is due to a loss of housing and economic hardship, they can be identified as an unaccompanied youth, and they're not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. One of the parents could go to jail and that guardian is in jail. And then so that student could be considered an unaccompanied youth at that time. There could be a CPS investigation going on where they're with a non-custodial parent. living in a not fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence. So there's many cases when you're seeing it could be case by case where it could go either way. And so really as a McKinney-Vento liaison, looking at that and answering that question for them. For the immunization, Angie Reader is asking, what about immunization records if they are coming from another state? Does the 30 days still apply? And so again, Angie, when you're working with another state, you would ask them about their timeline and when they're able to get it to you. The 30 days of that provisional enrollment is really guideline and guidance for what you're doing. Again, you're going to have like case by case. If the records are coming snail mail, like from North Carolina or wherever it is, making sure you as a McKinney-Vento liaison is communicating with the registrar and the administration about when those records are coming in. Oftentimes, like it can be due to like FERPA requirements or however they're going to send it. It has to be done as a fax. And so the McKinney-Vento liaison can help facilitate that process. Sometimes it does take a little bit longer than 30 days, but I would say as long as everybody knows what's happening in that situation, then it can be done. All right. So anonymous attendee, we had, hi, I did ask a question Q&A in the chat and it has not been addressed. I wanted to make sure it was not a fallout. Thank you. I'm not sure what the question is.
And we are receiving your questions through the chat and the Q&A, but we just want to make sure that we get through all the content in this webinar. So if your question is not answered during the webinar, please go ahead and send it to the homeless inbox. That way we do have the opportunity to respond back to you, but we are receiving those questions. It's just, we want to make sure you're getting all the content along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a balance. I try to take a few of the questions as I'm scrolling through. Beatrice, go ahead and answer your question live. The federal law does not have a 30-day requirement. You are correct. The only 30-day requirement comes from the Texas law. So it just depends on which part of that you're navigating. There is no 30 days it's just immediate enrollment and then removing barriers for the student to stay enrolled. So that's that retention component under the McKinney-Vento law. We do have some state requirements. And so I would say when you're looking at it and doing the provisional enrollment, and this usually comes around immunizations or getting access to school records, as long as everybody's informed of how the McKinney-Vento liaison is working with the family and how the family is working to get access to those records, that it's really case by case, but you're keeping everybody informed and letting them know, yes, there's no federal requirement. We do have some Texas requirements that we have to follow for the safety of our students. So really you're walking that and you're helping each student and family stay enrolled while also following all national, state, and local guidelines. Not an easy process, I will say, and looking at that. I think I found your question, anonymous attendee, so this will be the last one I answer on this portion. What is the guidance when a family never provides required records and other districts in Texas don't have anything either? Sometimes they're moving every 30 days to avoid providing the documents. We, of course, want to keep them in one place and avoid them withdrawing, but we are required to have proper documents. I would say that's a very unique case. I have seen that a few times. I will say this, a student or family that is trying to stay anonymous, there's usually a very good reason. One of the times in helping a mother and a daughter, and they did not have any records, it was because they were avoiding sex traffickers that they had escaped from. There's also been some where there's domestic violence. And so in working with an undisclosed shelter, there was reasons behind doing that kind of thing, and they were working with the court system for that. So I would say, depending on the trust with the family and looking at that, there could be other times where the family may not know how to access those required records. And so keeping them in the school of origin for, keeping them in a school past 30 days is something that we need to be doing as school personnel. And so getting to the heart of why they keep moving every 30 days or don't have access to their records. It could be that they came to the school district and didn't have access to a McKinney-Vento liaison that connected them to Vital records request, so getting the birth certificate and requesting it from that state or working with another state to get that information. So it's really just stepping in and helping the family and seeing why they keep moving around and what the circumstances are, and if we as school district personnel can help them with that. Some are above what we are able to do, and some are within our purview to help out. So Whitney is asking, what is the process when you enroll immediately? They live out of district and then determine they do not qualify under McKinney-Vento and the transfer deadline is passed. That would be determined under your school district. We can only speak to doing the immediate enrollment and keeping the retention of the student if they're experiencing homelessness under McKinney-Vento. So if they don't qualify under McKinney-Vento, it would divert back to whatever your district process is. Okay.
Do you want to grab one more? Christine
can.
Beck. Yeah, Christine Beck, 1120. This is the one that showed up in the Q&A and chat. Can you please clarify what happens regarding McKinney-Vento requirements after 30 days? It is very clear that they must be granted immediate enrollment, but if they are provided with a lot of resources and assistance that is documented by the LEA and remain non-compliant with state enrollment requirements after the 30 days, then what written requirements do we resort to?
Okay, I'm not seeing where you have that. Is that
Scroll,
in the
yeah, scroll to the very top of the question and answer, and it's the fifth one down. Yeah.
So the 30 days is only referring to the immunizations. So, and it's a provisional enrollment, and it's not like a hard, fast deadline, except for immunizations. So just want to be very clear on that component of it. What is in the McKinney-Vento federal law and the requirements is that the McKinney-Vento liaison works with doing provisional enrollment of students to provide that immediate enrollment, and then is also connecting them to get those vital records, depending on what it is that they're missing as part of the school enrollment process. So once they've done the immediate enrollment, and then you're providing the resources and assistance that's documented by the school district, and they remain non-compliant with state enrollment requirements after the 30 days, then what written requirements do we resort to? So that would just depend on what your, as a McKinney-Vento liaison, what your process is. Again, figuring out why the student or the family is non-compliant. It depends on what they're actually being non-compliant for. This sounds like it's a scenario that you're experiencing, Christine, in your school district. And so I would encourage you to give the full context of the scenario and work with your ESC McKinney-Vento liaison to work through that. If they feel like it's something that needs to come to TEA to be escalated, then they can send it to us, and then we can also help problem solve it. But that's not usually typical once they've been connected with the resources of staying non-compliant. There's usually reasoning behind it. Okay, student coding. So McKinney-Vento student coding, student eligibility for McKinney-Vento services should be assessed every single year. McKinney-Vento eligible students should be coded at the time of identification. Identification and coding is for the current school year, and McKinney-Vento coding does not carry over from year to year. So those are the basics behind coding. You can find the coding for students experiencing homelessness in TSDS. It's going to be C-189, the homeless status code. And this is where the language of doubled up comes in, sharing the residence with a family or individual that Anne dropped a little bit earlier. It also has, so that's a code of a 2, and 3 you have unsheltered, and you're looking at that portion of it. 4 is hotel motel, and 5 is a shelter. I'm just kind of smiling because I would do it as an approval email, and where I would use the codes that would go straight to our PEMS coordinator to make sure, and our registrars to make sure that students were getting coded. And then the other aspect that we would do, an unaccompanied youth is going to be C-192, and that's going to be the unaccompanied youth code, which is another code that you would include as a McKinney-Vento liaison for whoever's doing your coding, or if you're doing it yourself. 3 is the student is accompanied, so they do live with their family, their legal guardian during the school year. And then the 4 is going to be for your unaccompanied youth. They are a homeless student that is not in the physical custody of a parent or legal guardian. Both of these codes are for students experiencing homelessness only. This does not refer to any other student group for unaccompanied youth. So just wanted to make sure to make that very clear. Notification of McKinney-Vento student eligibility. So the McKinney-Vento liaison should implement a process and procedures to ensure all identified McKinney-Vento students have been coded for all appropriate services in a timely manner by providing registrars or other designated contacts an email notification with the appropriate homeless status and at-risk indicator code in TSDS, PEMS, and also informing designated food services contacts to code all eligible students for free meal status. And then also having a process in place to follow up on all of that coding, especially we are in October, PEMS snapshot is at the end of the month. And so doing your first check of all of your students experiencing homeless to make sure that they've been coded for free meal, that their homeless status codes are correct according to your documents. We would do this right before PEMS snapshot in my school district to make sure that we were doing that. Working with the PEMS coordinator would run a report, and then we would check those. If there was, and one of the easy ways to do that, and the reports that we would run would show a code where you had different coding for different students in the same family. So that was one easy way that we could see if we had a coding mismatch. Also having a process in place to follow up with your students and families, your unaccompanied youth, if they have not been getting free meals, and they should have been coded at the date of identification and you connected with your food service contact. Typically, we would do this as one email for registrars, administrators, PEMS, department, as well as food services to make sure that everybody was on board with what that was. And if something was happening with that, we could respond to that email of the date of identification and ask, hey, can you check on this coding and make sure that it's backdated to the appropriate nutrition services so that those fees could be taken off for the student. Reviewing the accuracy of McKinney-Vento coding. So just walked you through a process that we would use to do that. So running reports, developing and reviewing, monitoring those reports to ensure accurate and timely coding of the student eligibility criteria. So it's going to be your 2, 3, 4, and 5, doubled up, motel, hotel, unsheltered, the date of qualification from when you did that, at-risk status, unaccompanied youth status, if it's applicable. So you're really collaborating with the campus registrar or designated staff member to review these systems and processes in place to review coding and identify, remedy any coding errors. You also need to ensure to code McKinney-Vento eligible students in a timely manner so they can access services immediately, such as nutritional services. So really reviewing your program reports, developing those processes and procedures to address and correct any coding errors throughout the school year. And there are pivotal times, I would say, right before PEMS snapshot, doing another one sometime in the mid-year when you're looking at that. So each quarter, really looking and reviewing and updating your data can be helpful. And then also end of year would be a pivotal time to be doing that. So I'm going to save the questions for the end. And we're going to keep going through this part of it because had a lot around McKinney-Vento transportation and want to get into it. So transportation must be provided to and from the school of origin at the request of the parent or guardian. In the case of an unaccompanied youth, at the request of the local liaison, students experiencing homelessness are eligible for school of origin transportation, and there's collaboration that must occur between LEAs to arrange the transportation. LEAs must agree on a method to share the responsibilities and costs. So students experiencing homelessness are eligible for school of origin transportation. Collaboration must occur between LEAs to arrange that transportation. There's two types for school of origin transportation. One, they could live outside of the attendance area for that campus, but they're still in the school district. So that would be incumbent upon that school district to provide both AM and PM transportation for that student for school of origin transportation. The other portion of it where it's talking about sharing the cost and the method and the agreement is when you have a student that is living outside of the school district attendance area. They're living in another school district, but they have school of origin, which could be the campus where they lost their housing or that they last attended. And they are being transported to that school of origin from the other school district. Will usually provide AM, and then the school of origin school district is going to be providing PM, or they come up with some kind of agreement to share the responsibility and the costs of that school of origin transportation. It's different across the state of Texas between different school districts. But as long as they're under the federal law, there's an agreement on the method to share the responsibilities and cost, and they are arranging that transportation to and from the school of origin for that student. The best interest determination happens with the McKinney-Vento liaison as well as the parent or the guardian. So really considering student-centered factors related to the child or youth's best interest, including factors related to the impact of mobility on achievement, education, health, safety, giving priority to the request of the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth. So there is a checklist that is provided through NCHE's website. You can ask your ESC McKinney-Vento liaison for that information. But when you're doing the best interest determination, you presume that keeping a child or youth in their school of origin is in the child or youth's best interest. So that's the first part of the best interest clause in the McKinney-Vento Act, except when doing so is contrary to the request of the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth. It may be better in doing the best interest determination and enrolling in that attendance area. The key component of this is that it's up to the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth. This is a conversation that is happening between the McKinney-Vento liaison and that parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth to determine best interest. But ultimately, it's up to that parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth to make that determination for themselves, what's in the best interest. Duration of school of origin rights. So homeless children and youth have the right to attend their school of origin for the duration of homelessness. In any case in which a family becomes homeless between academic years or during an academic year, for the remainder of the academic year, if the child or youth becomes permanently housed during an academic year. The school of origin services, the school the student attended when permanently housed, or the school in which the student was last enrolled. Students who become homeless in between school years may continue attending their school of origin for the following school year. And students may continue attending their school of origin for the duration of their homelessness, even if they move into permanent housing. So if you have a family that starts off in a homeless living situation at the beginning of the year, and then they get into an apartment later into the year, school of origin still applies to them because they are approved for the entire school year. So once you're approved as a McKinney-Vento student in that school year, you remain coded and approved to be in that school district, that school of origin, for the entire year. Every year, you assess annually on a case-by-case basis with your families if they are still eligible. So in that case, you may have a family that is in deep economic crisis, financial difficulties due to a medical situation or a major life event like we discussed earlier, and they could be in a duration of homelessness that can last for years. But the important component of, yes, it could last for 5 years, but during those 5 years, every year they're being assessed annually if they're still eligible for McKinney-Vento rights and, all the different things that come with it by the McKinney-Vento liaison. So it could be a duration of homelessness of 5 years, but they're assessed every year by that McKinney-Vento liaison. Assessed, done the intake, the whole process is done every single year. So when you're looking at school of origin considerations, so personal safety issues, there may be, you could have a high school student that is in their last 2 years and that program is only offered at their school of origin, but they're living an hour and a half away from that school. An hour and a half for a high school student to sit there to get to school is much different when you're looking at like the personal safety issues and you bring in the age of the student. A 17-year-old versus a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, that might look like a very different situation in being able to be on the bus. And so when you're thinking of these school of origin considerations and you're talking with the parent, the age of the student, the safety of the student, the travel time that's involved, and the time of the school year. It could be the beginning of the year, right? And that you don't want a younger student to be traveling on the bus for an hour and a half there and back. There is a similar program that's in that attendance area school that student can go to. Or it could be a time of the school year where credits are very important. When you get to the end of a semester for a high school student or a middle school student, there could be exams, there could be tests that they need to take, there could be different things that are set up. And so if it is something where they do want to change schools at the end of the semester, but they want to be able to have all their credits, that time of the school year can be very important in the liaison working with the student, the family, and the unaccompanied youth to make sure that they stay enrolled for those pivotal 3 weeks as they're going through that process Again, you get very creative as a homeless liaison. I remember many times doing like prepaid gas cards for my students and families to finish a school year so they could get their diploma, so that they could take some of the tests that they needed to take, that they were looking at post-secondary opportunities. So there's a lot of school of origin considerations when you're looking at that, and each of these 4 are equally important. LEA strategies to support school of origin services. So you have LEA policies and procedures to support implementation of school of origin transportation services. This usually looks like close communication with your transportation department and McKinney-Vento liaisons that are in your area and your network, and doing that partnership with those neighboring LEAs to come up with that process and system. They may fill out, we did it as a Google form. They may do it as an email process. They may have like a coordinated thing that they're doing with a spreadsheet that's shared. Different things can happen, but as long as you're monitoring those transportation services regularly to ensure continuity of services, updating your transportation department to make sure that they have the busing information and any new student or family contact information to the appropriate campus and LEA contact. All of those are excellent strategies to support school of origin services. You can also have a sample school of origin transportation letter that's on our website that is provided to the family so that they know. You have the student information, you have the busing information, you have the no call guidance. So you could have first no call, second no call, third no call, McKinney-Vento and transportation program contact information. When it comes to transportation, connecting straight to the transportation department, who has access to connect to a bus of like, hey, they were supposed to be home. They usually get home between 5:20 and 5:40. It's now 6:10. So making sure that you have that phone number for them to be able to contact the router, and they contact the bus and be like, yes, there was a car accident or there was some, so they can have timely feedback and get access to what they need to get access to. There's some school districts that have this as a mobile app for families and students. And so just making sure that you're explaining all of that information, however your school district goes about it. In the mobile app, when we adapted that in our practice as a school district, there was an immediate notification that went out to our families like, this is going to be 30 minutes later, we're running 10 minutes early. So just depending on what that looks like. And then if they're not using the transportation is extremely expensive. If they are not using it, and you have a 3 no call rule and then you stop the transportation, the family can call, but they'll have to start the process again, wait the 3 to 5 days to make sure that they have that. That letter really needs to capture your student information, the busing info, what's the bus number, what's the route number, your no call, no show guidance. And you can also use it as a script when you're going over that with the parent or guardian to make sure that they understand the school of origin as you do it in your school district. For post-secondary support, when you're looking at this, only unaccompanied youth in their senior year, unaccompanied homeless youth are eligible for this post-secondary support that we're going to talk about specifically. So 1, for all homeless students, school counselors must assist students with experiencing homelessness with college preparation and readiness. That's for every homeless student. And then for unaccompanied homeless youth, local liaisons must inform their unaccompanied youth about their independent student status on the FAFSA and assist with verification of that status. So for FAFSA, when you're looking at this at any time on or after whatever the date is for FAFSA, did your high school or school district homeless liaison determine that you were an unaccompanied youth who was homeless? And the student would need to answer yes. And that prompts them to the next question. Could be, did a director of an emergency shelter or transitional housing program funded by the U.S. Department of HUD determine that you were an unaccompanied youth? And that can be a yes. Either one of those yeses will, and then you have the third one, did the director of a runaway or homeless youth basic center or transitional living program determine? So if any of those 3 individuals determined that there was an unaccompanied homeless youth situation on the FAFSA, it will, if you answer yes, it means that you are lacking fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. Your unaccompanied means you're not living in the physical custody of your parent or guardian. If you answered no, then you are not homeless or at risk of being homeless. So if you've triggered those yeses on the FAFSA, then as a McKinney-Vento liaison, and we have a sample form of this that you guys can use, Every single McKinney-Vento student that is unaccompanied and homeless in their senior year has to be provided a verification letter that can be used for the purposes of federal financial aid. So you fill this out. This has sensitive information with the social security number. So this is something that would need to be hand delivered to the student, not something that you would do through email due to FERPA purposes. But it's signed by the McKinney-Vento liaison, given to the unaccompanied homeless youth. And with the new federal law requirements that have gone out, that student only needs the letter one time. They don't need it every year anymore, which is great. So you do the one verification letter for them. I always encouraged my students to take a picture of it so that they always had it when they went to the financial aid office, and just really walk them through what that looked like. The financial aid office gets this, they have their FAFSA, and then they get full Pell Grant funding or a portion of that Pell Grant funding. The majority of my students got full Pell Grant funding for it. All right, guys, we are at 12:40, and so we're going to go through dispute resolution, and there really will be a few minutes for some high-level questions that Anne will identify and we'll go through. So for dispute resolution, McKinney-Vento dispute resolution process for eligibility, enrollment, and school selection. So every school district has local policies and procedures to address disputes, complaints, or grievances. They're either known as one of those three things. So I've seen it all across Texas. A lot of grievances or disputes or complaints. It's a three-tiered process of what needs to happen at the local level. So one, the McKinney-Vento liaison, two, LEA or campus leadership, and three, the superintendent or the school board. If the LEA has made a determination regarding student eligibility for McKinney-Vento, student enrollment eligibility, school selection, that the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth disagrees with, they may dispute that determination. Only 3 items can be disputed under McKinney-Vento: eligibility, enrollment, and school selection. So the McKinney-Vento liaison must provide the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth a written notice, including an explanation of the decision regarding eligibility, school selection, and enrollment, and the right of the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth to appeal or dispute that decision. So this is very critical under McKinney-Vento law. Once that enrollment decision is made, the LA McKinney-Vento liaison is really working with that student or family even when they don't qualify. They're including an explanation of the reasons for the determination of typically non-qualification for that student or family. And that's in a written format. They also, in that written letter, are including a description of their local appeal process. So if they're appealing, if they want to do a grievance, if they want to do a complaint or a dispute, however your school district identifies that, whatever that appeal process is for your school district, that needs to be included in that written notification to the parents or families. It has the appeal process, the appeal timelines, and information on how and to whom to appeal the decision. So that McKinney-Vento liaison needs to make sure that they have that written determination and all this information in there for the parent or guardian and really walk them through that. The parent or guardian is provided promptly in a way that is understandable. So there was times when I would do that written explanation and then also followed up, would get a follow-up phone call asking how do we go about this dispute resolution for that grievance process for the school district, and walk them through that, connected them with the personnel in our school district who handled that portion of it. But I always stayed in the loop as the McKinney-Vento liaison. You're federally mandated to help them through that process. So written notice does not include providing information on a web page. This is something that needs to be meant for the parent or unaccompanied homeless youth specifically. So it has to be in their case-by-case determination, written, and with all of that information provided to them. TEA McKinney-Vento dispute resolution process and FAQ resources. So we have a website that Anne will drop into the chat. If a dispute is not resolved locally, it has to go through the whole grievance process all the way through the school board determination of that grievance. And once it is finished with the 3 tiers or however many tiers you have in your school district, ending with a determination from the school board of that grievance or dispute resolution, then it would come to TEA. So only disputes that have gone through all 3 levels of the local dispute process will be reviewed by TEA. If it is sent to us prematurely or before that process has been done, we will connect them back to the ESC McKinney-Vento liaison, who will help with the technical support for the family as well as the school district as they go through that process. But that's not something that TEA would make as a determination until it's gone through all 3 levels. Once it goes through all 3 levels, it comes to TEA. TEA's decision from the Office of the Coordinator regarding McKinney-Vento disputes are final. So whatever is decided at the state level is the final answer for that portion of it for that dispute. TASB has these resources for dispute of eligibility and school selection that can be very, very helpful. So Texas Association of School Board, also known as TASB, this is posted on our TEA website, and it is provided to regional McKinney-Vento liaisons as they're providing you the technical assistance. Exhibit A is a form for a parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth to file a formal dispute of the district's decision regarding student eligibility, school selection, or student enrollment under the McKinney-Vento Act. So if you don't know if you have access to that like written portion of it, this is an excellent resource to go ahead and pick up and adapt for your school district to be able to send out the written notice in the email and the letter that you're sending to your students and families. Exhibit B is information for district staff on the dispute resolution process and also has a frequently asked questions component. So Exhibit A would go to the family. Exhibit B is really for school district personnel to hold on to and look at the process. These don't come up very often, but when they do, you definitely want to have these resources on hand so that you have like your dispute, like go documents for what you need to do and how you need to incorporate it as part of your process. All right, so we're at the end and we are going to reserve the last 10 minutes for questions, but some of these resources may answer your questions. So our TEHCY web portal, and go ahead, take it away.
So our TEHCY web portal was launched out earlier this summer, and it is an updated, extended resource for all resources that we have for you. There's an extensive library of resources, and also our webinars and our professional development is there. I had dropped the link of this earlier, but I'm going to go ahead and drop it again here just in case. I really would recommend that you take some time to navigate through the web portal. We've done some walkthroughs of the web portal in earlier webinars, but if you do have any questions, please feel free to contact the homeless inbox. But it is a one-stop shop for a lot of the questions you may have. So that one is there, and it's linked also to the regular TEA base webpage. Going on to the next slide is our McKinney-Vento posters, and those have been distributed to our education service centers. And so if you need additional posters, you can reach out to your ESC McKinney-Vento liaison. They will, if they haven't already, reached out to distribute them to the school districts, and I am including the webpage there. If you scroll down, there is a section that's called McKinney-Vento posters, and it's separated for parents and also for youths in English and Spanish. And these are distributed every year. For technical assistance, Dr. Veramontes has already gone through this, but this is a visual. If an LEA has a technical assistance request and they reach out to TEA, what we typically do is we will connect you to the ESC, who is an extension of TEA, and they will be able to help support you through any technical assistance requests you may have. And so if you want to contact them directly and you don't know who they are, in the TEHCY web portal, there is a liaison link, or it's right here. I'm going to drop the liaison link as well. Your ESC McKinney-Vento liaisons are listed in this slide and the next slide. And I just dropped the link there. You can contact them. Again, this is very important for LEAs to update your McKinney-Vento liaison and AskTED, because in the web portal, there is a page for the directory for people to look for your school district's LEA liaison. All right, grant updates.
Oh, this is so exciting. And this is my favorite part. So we have an upcoming 201, and that's going to be on December 19th. We have a 301 that will be on January 30th, and then we have a 401 that will be on March 13th. So please join us virtually. The registration links will be on the PDF and you'll be able to access them. NAEYC conference for 2024, which is the National Recommended Conference, is going to be November 16th through November 19th. Attending in person is an allowable use of funds and a recommended way to attend the conference. I will be there in person this year, and then Anne is going to be there virtually. So many ways to join and enjoy the NAEYC conference. We have our 24-25 HMAR webinars. So they are coming up November 14th, February 13th, and May 1st. Had excellent attendance at this. HMAR, highly mobile and at-risk students, covers McKinney-Vento, foster care, and military. This is a great thing if you have a federal director or administrative staff to join in those webinars yourself as a McKinney-Vento liaison, or however you participate in the school district. If you work with those 3 student groups, it can be great to get the updates from there. Sign up for updates. So this is where you can sign up for listserv announcements. McKinney-Vento is under special student populations. So there's foster care, pregnancy, McKinney-Vento, at-risk, highly mobile student programs division, and military connected. And that's for our entire division and unit. And we want to thank you guys for attending. So this is the homeless education inbox that we've been referring to throughout the webinar. And if you guys can fill out this, she'll drop the survey down in the link so that you have it. But we really appreciate you guys attending. Anne is going to end the recording, and then we'll spend the last 9 minutes for some questions.